At Christmas, my son didn't send me an invitation. He sent me a bill. I was sorting screws into a jelly jar when the mail slot clacked like a reprimand. A thick, cream-colored envelope slid onto the hallway rug and came to rest against my boot. No return address, just my son's tidy handwriting, Nolan, angled like he'd learned adulthood from corporate fonts. For a second I stood there with my breath snagged on old hope. Maybe an invitation. Maybe a peace offering. Maybe the moment a father gets to be a father again. I carried it to the kitchen table. The table with the nick where Nolan, age 9, had stabbed a fork because I wouldn't let him watch the late game. I slid a butter knife under the flap and eased the thing open, gentle as if hope were a fragile bird that might spook and fly. The papers inside were heavy, professional, and absolutely hollow of warmth. Page after page of line items, venue, lighting, imported flowers, a string quartet, a drone videographer, a content team. At the bottom, a number bold enough to blot out the room, $82,450, and a note in Nolan's small, efficient script. Given the history, it's best if you don't attend, but you can still contribute. Send the transfer by Friday. N. I reread it, once for the money, twice for the cruelty. Best if you don't attend. I set the papers down and they made an expensive sound against the wood. The fridge hummed. The clock scolded. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle insisted on being heard. I pressed my knuckles to the table until the old scars went white. The shame, I noticed, arrived first, like a reflex I should have outgrown. Then the anger, slow and clarifying, like someone opening a window in winter. You get old in layers. Some are soft, with the photographs, the pocket watch, the recipes your wife wrote in a slanted hand before the chemo took more than hair. Some layers are hard. I reached for the hard one. By habit, I lifted the pocket watch from the fruit bowl where I keep it, a hale thing passed down from a coal man who timed his days by survival. The second hand ticked with a stubbornness I admired. I thought of Nolan at 8, asleep in the cab of my truck after a Little League loss, his hand clutching a foul ball like proof that failure wasn't complete. I'd promised then to be steady, not perfect, steady. My phone pinged before I could sit with the hurt. A cousin in the family group chat, people I hadn't seen in years but who somehow knew when to gossip, posted a laughing emoji and a line I read twice to believe. Heard the old man can't afford a suit, so he's not invited. Sad, but necessary. Sloane has standards. Sloane Avery, the fiancée I'd met exactly once, long enough to learn her smile paused like a buffering wheel when she couldn't place your net worth. Standards. I held the phone until the screen dimmed, then set it face down on the invoice. The rumor wasn't an accident. It was camouflage. If you decide to erase a parent, it helps to paint him in pencil first. I rinsed a mug just to hear water run. It didn't help. I dried the mug, made coffee for the doing of it, and sat with the bill. The venue, Briarcrest Manor, perched on the list like a bird of prey. I had driven past it on Route 17, a grand old bourbon fortune with too many windows to be happy. The figure beside it, $48,000, made me smile a little. Not at the price, but at the memory. 2 years back, Nolan had asked me to co-sign a revolving line for his boutique digital agency, Hale and Avery Media, a name that stacked ambition like chairs. I'd said yes because fathers are gamblers with terrible odds and excellent excuses. A week later, he'd used that line to cover payroll and strategic deposits. My name was still on those papers. My name was a lever he'd forgotten. I brought the laptop from the sideboard and opened the browser like a door to a room I no longer loved, but still owned. Public posts were easy. People get careless when they feel admired. Sloane's feed was a press release with eyelashes, mood boards, champagne, a rehearsal dinner in the vines. Her captions did the math for me. 200 guests, a luxury shuttle, a honeymoon bungalow on a lagoon so blue it felt photoshopped. And there, tucked between candids of ring boxes and flat lays, a tagged story. At Briarcrest events, confirming the date, and a payment scheduled, pending final wire. Pending. The word set something orderly in my chest. Another ping. This time a voicemail. Nolan, strained but trying for polite. "Hey, Dad, you saw the packet. It's a formality. Wire by Friday and we're golden." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, this is better. Less stressful for everyone." I saved it. Then I played it again to memorize the contempt disguised as calm. I wanted to call back and educate him about stress, about mortgage payments that arrive like weather, about the sound a doctor's voice makes when he says the word aggressive, about the emptiness after. But education is charity, and I was fresh out. Instead, I opened the state's business filings and pulled up Hale and Avery Media. Board members, Nolan Hale and Sloan Avery. Registered agent, a one-stop mailbox downtown. Liens, one active line of credit with a cosigner named Gregory P. Hale. Me, I clicked deeper. A recent amendment listed event activations as a new service vertical. I stared at those two words until they stopped being nonsense. If a deposit to Briarcrest had been funneled through the agency, if the vendor contracts were in the company's name instead of Nolan's, then they weren't just relying on my money. They were relying on my signature. My refusal wouldn't be sabotage. It would be governance. Steady. I texted one person, Mira Jensen. She used to sit across from me at the parts counter when I ran procurement at the plant, back when we still made things that outlived trends. Now she was an office manager for a law firm that specialized in contracts big enough to feed a city block. Greg, you ever miss yelling at late invoices? Mira, every day. You all right? Greg, hypothetically, if a co-signer refuses additional draws and requests an audit, how loud does that get? Mira, loud enough to make a planner put down his mood board. Coffee? We met at a diner that still believed in pie. Mira arrived with a legal pad and the sort of hug that fixes your spine. I slid the invoice across the table. She read like she was counting cards. When she finished, she tapped the margin. 2 fronts, she said. Family and paper. Don't mix them. On the paper, if the company touched these deposits, you can freeze access and request vendor confirmations. On the family, say nothing. You don't record. She took a breath. Greg, you ready for loud? Loud doesn't scare me, I said. Messy does, but I'm tired of being tidy. The bell over the diner door jangled, and an old Boy Scout troop shuffled in, all knees and enthusiasm. I watched them order pancakes, a memory flaring of Nolan at that age, scaling a creaky ladder to change our porch light, while I spotted him like the ground was lava. He'd been afraid then and asked me if fear was weakness. I'd said, "Fear is a flashlight. Point it where you need to see." I could almost hear myself say it again as I signed Mira's retainer agreement with a pen that didn't shake. Back home, the afternoon thinned into a March gray kind of light, even though the calendar said October. The house had the hollow quiet of a church after a funeral. Flowers, but no people. I set the invoice beside the phone, opened a notebook, and titled a fresh page, Briarcrest, Points of Contact. I listed them in a column, venue, caterer, quartet, planner, shuttle service, honeymoon broker, and drew a small box beside each. Every checked box would be a life jacket I sewed for myself. At 5, my neighbor, Tom Ellis, called from his front steps as if he'd been rehearsing. "Greg, you see the pictures? Your boy's fiancée posted a boomerang of the dress. Said the real guests will understand the limited list. Folks are reading that like tea leaves." He hesitated. "You good?" "I'm steady," I said. "How's your back?" "Worse when people act rich," he said, and we both laughed a little. After sunset, the group chat churned again. Someone, anonymous number, dropped a voice note recorded at a salon. 2 women, breathy with gossip, were agreeing that I'd become embarrassing, and that Sloan had saved Nolan from charity. I stared out the window until the yard light made the grass look like a postcard from a place I didn't remember visiting. When the voice note ended, I did something I haven't done in years. I prayed, not for them, not for me, for clear sight. The answer arrived as a practical thought, which is how grace sometimes dresses when it has work to do. If they turned you into a rumor, turn the rumor into a record. I set my phone on the table, opened the recording app, and tested it. My voice played back thinner than I felt. I remembered Mira's other note. Don't mix family and paper unless you're the one pouring. At 9, Nolan texted, confirmation you got the packet? Sloan says it's straightforward. Friday. I typed, erased, typed again, and then sent 2 words that tasted like Flint. Received. Reviewing. He replied with a thumbs up as if I'd RSVP'd to a webinar. Before bed, I taped the invoice to the inside of the pantry door. Not to hide it, nothing that big hides, but to make sure I couldn't reach for coffee in the morning without remembering both the insult and the plan. I wound the pocket watch, listened to its patient courage, and set it on the nightstand. The house settled around me, old beams answering the weather. Somewhere between waking and sleep, a headline shaped itself like a promise. They think silence means surrender. It means aim. I slept like a man who had finally pointed the flashlight. Tomorrow I would start checking boxes, and when the planner set down his mood board, I'd make sure he picked up the phone, with me on the line and a very different set of terms in front of him. The next morning I stood on my porch with a chipped mug of coffee in hand, the October air sharp enough to sting my lungs. Across the street, Tom Ellis was kneeling in his yard, struggling with a rake bigger than his hips. He waved, but there was hesitation in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something and wasn't sure whether he should. I didn't have to guess what weighed on him. People had started talking. It didn't take long for the whispers to travel. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years forwarded me a screenshot of a Facebook post. My son Nolan's fiancée, Sloan, had been tagged in a photo at Briarcrest Manor with the caption, "Real guests only. Standards matter." Beneath it, a string of comments bloomed like weeds, half congratulations, half smirking speculation about who hadn't made the list. My name surfaced there, casual as a footnote. His dad's not coming. Guess he couldn't handle the cost. Sad, I stared at those words until the letters blurred, couldn't handle the cost. As if money, or the lack of it, was the reason. As if a lifetime of overtime shifts, second mortgages, and nights in hospital chairs hadn't been enough. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure wrapped in mockery. Later, at the hardware store, I felt it again. A clerk I'd known for 20 years avoided my eyes while bagging my bolts. 2 women in the next aisle hushed their voices when I walked past, one whispering, "That's him," as if I were a headline instead of a man buying nails. I kept my face neutral, but inside the humiliation burned like acid. They weren't talking about Nolan. They weren't talking about Sloan. They were talking about me. The father painted as pathetic so the children could shine brighter. Back home, the silence of the house pressed in. Elena's photo sat on the mantel, her smile still patient, her eyes still kind. I spoke to it the way a lonely man sometimes does. "They're rewriting me," I whispered, like I never mattered. The photo gave no answer, but the memory of her voice echoed, "Greg, you're steadier than you think." The phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister, Marlene. "Greg, I don't know what's going on, but people are saying Nolan's ashamed of you. They're saying you can't afford to be there." Her voice was equal parts pity and disapproval, as though I'd invited the scandal myself. I kept my reply measured. Let them say what they want. They don't know the truth. But the truth was heavier than I cared to admit. It wasn't just about being left out of a wedding. It was about being recast as a villain in my own family story. And the audience, friends, neighbors, even distant relatives, seemed eager to believe it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the bill still taped inside the pantry, glowing in my mind like a neon sign. I replayed every rumor, every half-smile from neighbors, every message dripping with gossip. The humiliation wasn't accidental. Sloane was too deliberate for accidents. She was staging an image, and in her script I was the expendable character, the old man who'd embarrassed them one too many times. I pressed the button on my phone's recorder and spoke softly into the silence. If they want me invisible, let's make sure every word they say becomes visible. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. It was the first brick in a wall I was about to build. At dawn, I walked the block. Mr. Ellis flagged me down. "Greg," he said, scratching his neck, "I heard some talk at the barber shop. Folks saying you weren't invited because you'd bring the mood down. That true?" I looked him square in the eye, my hands deep in my jacket pockets. "Not true," I said, "but let them believe it. The longer they do, the harder the truth will hit." He nodded, uneasy, but I saw a respect flicker there too. Maybe he'd expected me to deny it, to beg the rumors away. Instead, I'd chosen silence. Not surrender, but strategy. Inside, I opened my notebook again. Beneath the title, Briarcrest Points of Contact, I drew a second column. Rumors, sources. Every name, every whisper, every screenshot would be logged. Not because I needed validation, but because I needed ammunition. By the time the sun set, I felt something unexpected. Not shame, not anger. Something colder, sharper, steadier. For years, Nolan had tried to convince himself I was a man defined by lack. Lack of money, lack of ambition, lack of worth. He had no idea what I still possessed. Memory, patience, and a ledger of truths that couldn't be erased. Humiliation, I realized, was only fuel. They had turned me into a rumor. I would turn their rumor into a reckoning. The weekend came and went like a slow bruise, darkening with every whisper that reached my ears. I didn't go to church that Sunday. Too many sympathetic stares and too many people eager to ask questions they already thought they knew the answers to. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook open, its pages filling with scribbled lists. On one side, Briarcrest vendors. On the other, rumors and sources. The columns grew steadily, line by line, until the paper looked like a battlefield map. It was one thing to feel humiliated. It was another to watch my name tossed around like a worn-out coat. But humiliation has an odd way of sharpening you, if you let it. By Sunday evening, my grief had hardened into something else. Resolve. I no longer wanted to argue with Nolan. I wanted to outmaneuver him. That's when I thought of Mira Jensen. Mira had once shared an office wall with me back at the plant when I worked procurement. She could wrangle overdue invoices out of suppliers with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. After the plant closed, she moved on to a law firm downtown, handling contracts bigger than the old assembly line itself. If anyone could help me untangle the trap Nolan and Sloane thought they'd set, it was Mira. I called her Monday morning. The hum of downtown traffic bled through the line when she answered. "Greg, haven't heard from you in ages." I cleared my throat. "I need a friend with a sharp pencil. Hypothetically, what happens if a cosigner refuses to release more funds on a credit line?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that tells you she's already 2 steps ahead. "Hypothetically," she said carefully, "the company stalls. Vendors panic, accounts get frozen, and if that cosigner requests an audit, things get loud." "Loud I can handle," I said. "It's silence I'm done with." We met that afternoon at a diner that still smelled of frying oil and burnt coffee, a place that hadn't changed since we were both young enough to believe overtime paid off in the long run. She slid into the booth across from me, a legal pad already in hand. I pushed the envelope across the table. She flipped through the itemized charges, her lips tightening with each page. "This isn't just a bill," she muttered. "It's a shakedown dressed in linen napkins." I told her about the rumors, the whispers of me being too broke, too bitter, too embarrassing. Mira's eyes hardened. They want you invisible, Greg, but you've got something they don't expect. You've got your name on the paper that keeps their party standing. Don't underestimate that. Her words struck deeper than she realized. For months, maybe years, I had let Nolan define me by what I wasn't. Not rich enough, not ambitious enough, not polished enough. But Mira was right. My name still meant something. It carried weight. It carried leverage. Document everything, she instructed, sliding the legal pad toward me. Every rumor, every message, every slip of arrogance. If this goes to court, evidence will matter more than feelings. And Greg? She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Don't warn him. Let him think you're weak. Let him think you're folding. The fall will be harder. I left the diner with the notebook heavier in my hand, but my shoulders lighter than they had been in weeks. That night, back at the house, I set the pocket watch on the table beside the bill. Its ticking was no longer a reminder of what I'd lost. It was a countdown. For the first time since Elena's passing, I felt something close to purpose. The rumors had painted me as a man too poor, too broken to matter. They'd forgotten one thing. A man with nothing to lose is a man with no brakes. And I was ready to drive this straight through the glossy facade Nolan and Sloane had built. The seed had been planted. Now it was only a matter of watering it with patience, and when the time came, the harvest wouldn't be flowers or champagne. It would be truth, delivered in front of every single person who had believed the lie. Sleep became optional. Each night I brewed a pot of stale coffee, opened the blinds just enough to see the streetlight outside, and turned my dining room into a war room. The kitchen table, once a place for Sunday dinners and birthday cakes, was now littered with legal pads, highlighted printouts, and a battered laptop that wheezed like a man twice my age. Mira's words kept circling back. Document everything. Don't warn him. Let him think you're folding. So I dug. At first, it was simple curiosity. I typed Nolan's company, Hale and Avery Media, into the state's online registry. Within minutes, my pulse quickened. The last quarterly report showed outstanding balances flagged as pending review. One note caught my eye. Event activations, expenses deferred. Event activations, that was a fancy phrase for unpaid deposits. I cross-checked Briarcrest Manor's event calendar. Their website had a smiling couple posed under an archway with the caption, "Fall wedding season is nearly booked. Only one Saturday left in November." That Saturday matched Nolan and Sloane's date, but buried in the site's small print was the kicker. Final payment required within 30 days of event. The invoice taped to my pantry door wasn't just about covering costs. It was about plugging holes before the entire structure collapsed. The deeper I went, the worse it looked. Sloane's Instagram, which she clearly thought was a lifestyle magazine, offered more clues than she realized. I scrolled through her posts, each one a polished advertisement for extravagance. Champagne towers, designer gowns, captions bragging about our dream, wedding, sponsored by Hustle. But the comments told another story. A florist had left a polite reminder, "Please confirm your second deposit soon," followed by radio silence. A DJ tagged the couple in a teaser video, then quietly untagged himself a week later. Unpaid vendors, deferred deposits, paper castles waiting for a breeze. I grabbed my pen and started a new column in the notebook. Cracks in the facade. Florist deposit overdue. DJ ghosted. Briarcrest final payment pending. Event activations line item suspicious. One by one, I checked off boxes, the rhythm steadying me more than sleep ever could. Around midnight, I called up an old contact from my plant days, Russell, who now drove delivery trucks for a catering outfit. We hadn't spoken in years, but old favors have long memories. "Russ," I asked cautiously, "you still drop shipments out near Briarcrest?" "Couple times a month," he said, suspicious. "Why?" I hesitated, then told him just enough. He chuckled bitterly. "Figures. I heard the caterers complaining already. Big order, no follow-through. Some folks got champagne taste and tap water wallets. That was confirmation enough. When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Images flickered. Nolan as a boy, begging for baseball cleats I couldn't afford, crying because he didn't fit in with the other kids. Back then, I'd stretched every paycheck to give him a chance. Now, he was leveraging my name to buy chandeliers he couldn't pay for. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been too modest for his world, but apparently my credit was glamorous enough. At 2 a.m., I took a walk around the block, the cold air biting at my face. Houses glowed with blue TV light or the quiet hum of families asleep. My house, by contrast, stood dark and watchful, like a sentry keeping secrets. When I returned, I picked up the pocket watch from the table. Its steady ticking reminded me that time was no longer the enemy. It was the tool. Each tick meant another rumor spreading, another vendor doubting, another chance for me to aim before striking. I wrote a final line in the notebook before heading to bed, the pen pressing deep into the paper. He built the stage. I'll control the spotlight, and with that, I closed the book, knowing the first act of my counterattack had already begun, not with shouting, not with threats, but with quiet, relentless digging in the shadows. By Tuesday morning, the notebook had stopped looking like a diary and started looking like a dossier. Mira had emailed a tidy set of templates, calm, lethal language you could slide across a table without raising your voice. At 9:15, with the envelope of requested documents tucked into a manila folder and the pocket watch in my coat, I dialed the number listed on Briarcrest's preferred planner page. "Pearson Company Events," a bright voice sang. "How may we elevate your moment?" "This is Gregory Hale," I said, co-signer on Hale and Avery Media's operating line. "I need to review the file for the Hale-Avery wedding. I'll be in at 10. There was a small silence, the kind people fill with assumptions. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Rowan can see you at 10. The office sat in a glass and chrome building downtown, all curated plants and citrus candles, the kind of place that confuses price for peace. A wall of mood boards faced the reception desk, pinned swatches, wax seals, photos of tablescapes so immaculate you suspected the forks had agents. A man in a navy suit emerged from a frosted door with the posture of someone who had never had to carry anything heavier than approval. "Mr. Hale, Rowan Pierce." His smile was perfect. His eyes measured me like a budget. "Can I get you a sparkling water?" "Tap is fine," I said, and took the chair opposite his desk. He settled behind it, sliding a leather folder toward me. "As you'll see," he began, "we're approaching the final wire deadline. The manor requires a balance by Friday. We're very excited to deliver a seamless experience for Nolan and Sloan." I opened my manila folder and placed Mira's first document on his desk. Notice of temporary suspension of draws and request for audit. I let the title breathe a beat before speaking. "Before any wire," I said, "we need to clarify whose signature is underwriting these commitments. Is the contract with Nolan Hale and Miss Avery personally, or with Hale and Avery Media, LLC? He blinked, the first chip. "The company," he said, "standard for influencer couples. They run everything through the brand." The initial deposit came from a corporate card. I nodded as if we were discussing weather. "Then you are relying on a line of credit bearing my co-signature. As of this morning, further draws are suspended pending audit. You'll receive vendor verification requests by close of business." I slid the second document forward. "Please provide your full vendor list and copies of all payment schedules." Rowan sat back, the candle glow catching the microsecond where Polish gave way to calculation. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "our deposits are non-refundable." "I'm aware," I said, "and your non-refundable deposits will remain exactly as they are, non-refundable. But I will not authorize new funds, nor permit anyone to represent that I will. If your production timeline depends on money that does not yet exist, adjust your timeline." He glanced at the frosted door, then back at me. "Nolan was very clear. he said. He said you were grateful to contribute. I kept my voice level. What he was is mistaken. He's also banned me from attending. That's a family matter. This is paper. Keep them separate, and we'll both sleep better. Rowan's hand hovered above his phone, the way a man hovers over an emergency brake. May I loop Nolan in? He asked. You may do whatever your instincts advise, I said, and took a sip of the water a junior assistant had placed at my elbow. But for transparency, I'm recording our meeting. I tapped my phone where Mira's recommended app glowed its red dot. One-party consent, legal and today medicinal. He punched Nolan's number and hit speaker. It rang twice. Yeah? Nolan's voice arrived already at a sprint. Rowan, make it fast. I'm on a call with the quartet. Your father's here, Rowan said, crisp. He's presented a suspension notice. He's asking for the vendor list and payment schedules. He says further draws require his authorization. The line was silent long enough to hear Rowan's candle crackle. Then, what is he doing there? Nolan demanded, the effort at restraint fraying. He knows the plan. He sends the wire and stays home. That was the agreement. There was no agreement, I said, not loud, not soft. There was a bill. Dad, he said, the word practiced to sound weary, you're making this difficult. It's a simple ask. The vendors will receive a verification request by end of day, I said. If they have been told I am funding this event, they have been misled. Until my audit concludes, no one should rely on my name. On the speaker, air moved, the way it moves when someone is learning that the ground is not exactly where he believed it to be. Then Sloane appeared in the soundscape, her voice stepping into the room as if her heels could be heard through a phone. Mr. Hale, she said, sugar edged with glass, we're days away. You withholding now is petty. Rowan winced. Good planners flinch at words that can't be tastefully arranged. Words like withholding and petty belong to rumor, I said. On paper, this is called governance. Mr. Pierce, note for your records. Any future representation that I have approved payment is false until you receive a written release from me. Rowan's pen began to move, a metronome of compliance. On the line, Nolan's breath roughened. This is sabotage, he snapped. Do you want people laughing at us? Is that your goal? My goal, I said, is to put the truth where it belongs. You chose to make this public when you sent a bill instead of an invitation. I'm choosing to make it official. He hung up. Not a goodbye, just a sound like something dropped. The speaker went blue and quiet. We sat with the silence long enough for the candle to earn its keep. When Rowan finally spoke, the voice was still courteous, but had acquired the gravity of weather. I'll need that vendor list to counsel them appropriately, I said. He opened a drawer and slid a printed schedule across. Critical path, Hale/Avery. Florals, lighting, rentals, entertainment, transportation, photography, videography, rehearsal. Dinner site, clean columns, due dates, sums. That add up to portraits of two people pretending debt is a decor choice. I took out my pen and drew small boxes beside each line. Mr. Pierce, I said, this will be easier if we cooperate. I'm not here to destroy your event. I'm here to make sure my signature isn't used as a stage prop. I tucked the schedule into my folder. Expect an email from I paused, from Mira's firm with formal requests. Until then, please inform vendors that the funding structure is under review. No more deliveries on spec. No promises on my behalf. Rowan nodded with the tired gratitude of a man finally allowed to treat a problem like a problem. I'll update the production timeline, he said, and Mr. Hale. He glanced up, the planner peeling off the human beneath. For what it's worth, my father paid for half my sister's wedding. He cried when he walked her down the aisle. This arrangement is unusual. Unusual, I said, standing, is a polite word for a lot of things. In the hallway, I paused at a framed photograph of a bride gripping her father's arm. He's laughing with his whole face, the way men do when love makes them brave. The picture landed like a stone in a pond, sending rings into places I keep walled. I pressed my thumb to the edge of the frame, then let go. Outside, the day had brightened in that brittle autumn way, sun bouncing off windshields like a dare. I sat in my truck and opened the folder. Case number from the bank. Mira had insisted we log the suspension with a human being, not just a portal. Vendor list. Secured. Recorded call. Saved and backed up. I texted Mira a photo of the critical path. Greg. Planner briefed. Vendors pausing. Speaker call. Captured. Mira. Good. Send me emails. I'll push notices. And Greg. Don't gloat in public. Paper wins quietly. On the way home, I stopped at the credit union and signed a single-page instruction. No ACH draws or wires from the Hale and Avery line without dual, written consent. The teller stamped it with a date that will matter later, the ink settling like a promise. By late afternoon, the group chat sputtered with a new theory. Heard Briarcrest is impossible to work with, someone posted, generously moving blame to architecture. Beneath it, a cousin added a string of broken heart emojis. I put my phone face down and wrote in the notebook. Planner rattled. Vendor list obtained. Bank hold active. Nolan angry. Sloan contemptuous. Truth beginning to sound like a rumor that bites back. Dusk came early. I set the pocket watch beside the stove and listened to it saw the hour into pieces, the sound clean as a whetstone. Then a name I hadn't said out loud in years tugged from a drawer of memory. Evan Rios, Nolan's childhood friend who used to camp on our couch when home wasn't safe. The kid I taught to change a tire on a wet Saturday. The young man who grew into a photographer with a private investigator's eye. If anyone could place a quiet lens where it mattered, it was Evan. I thumbed through my contacts until I found a number I'd never deleted. My finger hovered over the green button. The flashlight of fear pointed the way. Tomorrow, I told the empty kitchen. Tomorrow we add eyes. The number rang twice before a familiar voice, deeper now but carrying the same easy warmth, came through. Mr. Hale? Wow, been a long time. It's Evan. Gregory, I corrected gently. It's been years since you called me Mr. Hale. You still taking pictures that make people nervous? He chuckled. Depends on who's paying me. Some weddings, some corporate gigs, and yeah, a little investigative work here and there. Why? What's going on? I took a breath, steadying myself. It's Nolan. He's getting married. There was silence, then a short, disbelieving laugh. You're Nolan? Haven't spoken to him since he iced me out sophomore year. Always thought that was Sloane's influence. She never liked how close we were. She didn't like anyone who couldn't pad her image, I said, the bitterness tasting old and new all at once. He's banned me from the wedding, sent me a bill instead. $82,000, Evan whistled low. He what? And people say scammers wear masks. That's bold even for Nolan. It's more than bold, I said. It's built on paper I signed. I co-signed a line of credit for his company years ago. He's been funneling wedding deposits through it. I shut the tap, but now the rumors are spreading that I'm broke, bitter, and unwanted. I need eyes, Evan. Quiet eyes. Someone to watch, document, and be where I can't. I heard his chair squeak as he leaned forward. You want photos, recordings, proof of what they're doing? Yes, I said simply. If they want to paint me as invisible, I want to show the world who's really hiding. For a moment I thought he might refuse, afraid of dredging up old wounds with Nolan. Instead, his voice hardened. Mr. Greg, I owe you. When my parents split, you were the only one who let me crash on the couch, taught me how to hold a wrench. Nolan laughed at me, but you didn't. I don't forget debts. I smiled faintly. This isn't about paying me back. It's about teaching him a lesson he's long overdue for. We agreed to meet that evening at an old diner on Broadway, the same one where I'd met Mira days before. When I walked in, Evan was already there, older, broader in the shoulders, a camera bag at his side, and the kind of sharp eyes that had seen too much. He stood and gripped my hand firmly. Gregory Hale, he said, shaking his head. You look the same. Tired, maybe, but steady. Steady's all I've got left, I admitted, sliding into the booth. Over coffee, I laid out the situation, the bill, the planner, the vendors, the rumors. He listened without interruption, only tapping a finger on the ceramic mug when anger flared. Finally, he nodded. All right, here's what I can do. I'll document the lead-up to the wedding. Vendors bailing, guests grumbling, any fights that break out. Photos, audio if I can manage. You'll have proof. Cold, undeniable. Good, I said, because I don't plan to argue with Nolan anymore. I plan to show him. Evan grinned, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to crash my fridge after Little League. This is going to sting, he said, but sometimes a sting saves a man from worse. We clinked our mugs like it was a toast. Not to victory, not yet. To preparation. When I got home that night, the rain had started again, tapping against the windows in restless fingers. I found myself pacing the hallway, the weight of Elena's photo pressing from the mantel. You're steadier than you think, her voice echoed in memory. For the first time in weeks, I believed it. With Mira handling the paper and Evan watching from the shadows, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building something. They thought they'd erased me. But I was beginning to write myself back in, with ink they couldn't wash out and witnesses they couldn't silence. The first evening Evan came to my house, the sky was low and gray, the kind of sky that makes a man think storms are permanent. He stepped through my door with a duffel bag that clinked faintly, like he was carrying bottled lightning. Before you panic, he said, setting it on the coffee table, this is all legal. Kentucky's a one-party consent state. You're the one party. He unzipped the bag and laid out the tools like a magician arranging props. A sleek digital recorder no bigger than a lighter. A pair of pens that doubled as microphones. 2 pinhole cameras that could disappear into a bookshelf. Even an app that converted any incoming call into an instant recording file. Technology's come a long way since you and Nolan built that treehouse with duct tape and bad math, he added with a grin. I picked up one of the pens, rolling it in my hand. It felt like holding the future of the fight. You're sure this isn't overkill? Greg, he said flatly, you're up against people who've already tried to rewrite you as broke and bitter. You don't fight whispers with dignity alone. You fight them with receipts. We spent hours testing placements around the house. One camera angled toward the front door to catch anyone who came pleading or accusing. Another tucked into the bookshelf by the mantel, focused on the living room. The recorder fit neatly under the edge of my kitchen table, where most of my conversations seemed to end up anyway. Evan's efficiency reminded me of myself in younger years, back when I could solve supply chain problems with nothing but a ledger and a phone line. He moved with the patience of someone who'd been underestimated too many times. As we worked, he spoke quietly. You know, Nolan wasn't always like this. Remember when he and I tried to sell baseball cards at that flea market? We thought $10 was a fortune. He paused, shaking his head. Somewhere along the way, he traded wonder for ambition, and ambition for greed. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched the tiny green light of a camera blink once, then steady. Ambition doesn't rot on its own, I finally said. It needs company. And Sloane, she's been good company for his worst instincts. By midnight, the house was wired in ways Nolan would never suspect. Evan showed me the app, how each recording would store to the cloud automatically, safe from accidental deletion. He left me with a checklist written in neat block letters. Record every call, save every message, catalog every rumor. After he left, I sat in the living room. The silence different now, less lonely, more watchful. The pocket watch ticked on the table, its rhythm joined by the hum of hidden devices. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was gathering. The very next day, the plan proved its worth. At 5 p.m, my phone lit up with Nolan's name. For a moment, I almost didn't answer, but then I tapped the green button and slid my finger over to the recording app. Dad, Nolan said briskly, Rowan tells me you've been interfering. That's not your lane. You're jeopardizing the entire schedule. Interfering? I repeated calmly, settling into my chair. I'm safeguarding my name. Sloane's voice cut in from the background, sharp as glass. "This is pathetic, Gregory. Do you know how many people are laughing already? Do you want to add fuel to that fire?" I let the recorder hum. "I'm not the one telling people I'm too broke to show my face. That rumor didn't start in my house." There was silence. Then Nolan's voice, lower, bitter. "You should be grateful you're even part of this. After Mom, after everything you failed to do, this is the least you can." I ended the call before he could finish. Not in anger, but in precision. Every word captured, every jab catalogued. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady. They thought the conversation had been theirs. In truth, it was mine. A fragment of evidence added to a growing archive. That night, I labeled the file carefully. Call 09-17-2024, Nolan Sloan, rumor confirmation.wav. The title alone was proof enough for anyone willing to listen. The house no longer felt like a place of retreat. It felt like a fortress. Every whisper that had painted me as invisible was about to become a record, sharpened and permanent. Let them speak, I thought, setting the recorder back on the table. Let them dig their own grave with their own words. I'll just keep the shovel polished. The first real crack came on a Thursday morning. I was sipping weak coffee at the kitchen table, notebook open, when Evan texted me a photo. It showed a florist's delivery van idling in the Briarcrest driveway, buckets of white roses still strapped inside. His caption read, "Driver waiting. No one paying. Pack back up." I zoomed in on the image. You could see the driver's posture, slumped, arms crossed, the look of someone tired of empty promises. The roses sat untouched, buds still wrapped in paper sleeves, beauty suffocating before it ever reached a vase. I checked the vendor list Rowan had given me. Sure enough, payment due by Wednesday. Not received. By mid-afternoon, the group chat was buzzing again. A cousin posted, "Anyone else hear that the wedding's in trouble? Caterer threatening to cancel?" Another chimed in, "Saw Sloan crying in the parking lot at the bridal shop." Screenshots poured in faster than I could log them. The rumors that had once painted me as broke were now circling them. That evening, Evan met me at the diner with his camera bag slung over his shoulder. He slid into the booth, ordered coffee, and dropped a USB drive on the table. "Footage from today," he said. "Not pretty." I plugged it into my laptop right there, the screen flickering to life with grainy video. Briarcrest's grand hall, half set, chairs stacked against the wall. A man in a catering uniform paced, phone to his ear, his voice caught clearly. "We need a deposit today. Otherwise, we're pulling out. Tell the couple, not the father. They're the ones who owe." I leaned back, the satisfaction bitter but steady. The vendors weren't fooled. They knew who had signed and who hadn't, and now the cracks were visible enough to catch on camera. "Keep collecting," I told Evan. "The more this unravels, the harder it will be for them to blame anyone but themselves." He nodded, his face grim. "You realize, Greg, you're not just sabotaging a party. You're dismantling their image. That might sting worse." "That's the point," I said. "They built their reputation on lies. I'm just letting gravity do its work." The next day, another text came in from Mira. "DJ canceled. Contract void without final payment. Copy attached." Attached was a PDF, the words "Termination of Services" printed in bold across the top. I saved it into my growing folder, labeling it neatly. Every cancellation was another nail in the coffin of Nolan's perfect day. But perhaps the sweetest proof came on Saturday. Evan sent me an audio clip captured outside Briarcrest. Nolan himself, voice raised, berating a delivery driver. "Do you know who I am? This event is the biggest of the season. You'll get your money when the wire clears. Just leave the boxes." The driver's voice was steady, unimpressed. "Sorry, sir. No payment, no delivery." The audio ended with a car door slamming and Nolan muttering a string of curses. Not fit for a wedding invitation. I played that clip 3 times before saving it to the archive. arrogance recorded, evidence secured. That night, sitting alone in the living room, I thought about Elena. She would have hated this. The pettiness, the bitterness, the spectacle. But she would have hated more what Nolan had become. She had believed in dignity, not deception. And dignity sometimes demanded that a man stop being silent. I opened my notebook and checked another box on the vendor list. Florist, gone. DJ, gone. Caterer, threatening. Each mark felt like a step closer to the reckoning I had promised myself. For years, Nolan had insisted I was a man of lack. But now it was his empire that was lacking. Lacking integrity, lacking money, lacking the respect of the very people he tried to impress. And I wasn't lifting a finger to destroy it. I was just holding the mirror steady while it collapsed. The storm began quietly, the way most collapses do, not with an explosion, but with small sounds of unraveling. By the second week of November, just days before the wedding, Evan's text came like clockwork. Each ping was another stone in the landslide. Florist gone. DJ out, confirmed with cancellation notice. Caterer demanding payment up front, no exceptions. One night, he sent a photo that made me pause mid-step in my hallway. It showed Briarcrest's ballroom, chandeliers blazing above a room that looked half abandoned. Round tables stood bare, no linens, no floral arrangements. A cluster of workers hauled crates of silverware back out to a waiting truck. The caption beneath read, "Caterer pulling stock. Guests have already started whispering." I stared at the image for a long time. This was what Nolan and Sloane had wanted. Opulence, a spectacle, a stage for their ambition. And here it was, dissolving before it had even begun. At breakfast the next morning, the gossip arrived on my own street. Tom Ellis leaned on his fence, arms crossed, his breath visible in the chill. "Greg," he called, voice pitched low. "Heard about the mess out at Briarcrest. Caterer's furious. My barber said half the town's already talking. Some of 'em think Nolan's been stiffing people for months." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth ground me. "Funny thing about reputations," I said. "They look strong until the first crack shows." He nodded, a smile tugging at his mouth. Folks are starting to see who he really is. Inside, I added another line to my notebook. "Reputation collapsing. Community chatter confirms." That evening, Evan and I sat in my living room, laptop open to a gallery of his newest shots. One showed Sloane outside a boutique, her gown draped awkwardly over her arm, makeup streaked by tears. Another caught Nolan in mid-argument with a vendor, finger jabbing the air like authority could substitute for money. "They're desperate," Evan said, leaning back in his chair. "But the vendors aren't budging. Word's spreading too fast now." I tapped the pocket watch on the table, its tick steady as my pulse. Good. Let them feel the weight. I don't want this hidden in fine print. I want the truth written in bold. The next day, it happened. The first true collapse. Mira called at noon, her voice brisk. "Greg, the manor just sent notice. They're halting setup until full payment clears. Half their staff walked out already. Guests arriving early will find an empty hall." I felt something sharp twist inside me. Not joy, not pity, but a grim kind of release. Months of humiliation, of being erased, had all led to this moment. And now it wasn't me under scrutiny. It was them. That night, my voicemail filled with Nolan's frantic messages. "Dad, what the hell did you do? The estate's threatening to cancel everything. You need to fix this." Another came minutes later. "Vendors are walking out. Guests are already asking questions. You're ruining my life." I let each message play, then saved it. Evidence neatly filed. Evan showed up around 9, rainwater dripping from his jacket. He placed a stack of photos on the table. Guests in cocktail dresses standing under umbrellas. Confusion etched across their faces. Workers carrying crates away instead of in. A violinist loading her case into a taxi, her expression a mix of frustration and relief. "This," Evan said, tapping the photos, "is the beginning of the end." I nodded, setting my pen down beside the notebook. "No," I corrected quietly. This is only the middle. The end comes when they stand in front of everyone they wanted to impress and realize the only name left standing is mine. The house felt different that night, less like a refuge, more like a command post. Every recorded call, every photo, every rumor turned fact was another arrow in a quiver I hadn't thought I still had the strength to carry. But I did, because I wasn't the one collapsing. The call came just past dusk, when the November wind rattled the shutters and the pocket watch ticked loud enough to be a heartbeat. I had been expecting it. Nolan's earlier voicemails were frantic, but this one arrived with a persistence that felt like a storm pounding at the door. The phone lit up with his name, vibrating against the kitchen table until it nearly slid off the edge. I let it ring 4 times before answering, thumbing the record button on the app Mira had insisted I install. My voice, when it came, was calm. "Gregory Hale." "Dad!" Nolan barked, his words clipped with fury. "What the hell are you doing? Rowan says you've frozen the accounts. The vendors are calling non-stop. Half of them walked. Do you realize you're sabotaging my wedding?" I leaned back in the chair, steadying my tone. "Your wedding? Nolan, you sent me a bill. That's not an invitation. It's a transaction. I don't fund events where I'm erased." "You're twisting this." His voice cracked, higher now, desperation bleeding through the anger. "It was Sloane's idea to limit the guest list. You wouldn't have fit with her friends, her colleagues, but you were still supposed to contribute. That's what family does." "Family invites you to share joy," I said evenly, "not to finance an image." There was a pause, then Sloane's voice cut sharp across the line, like glass breaking. "Gregory, this is childish. You're making us look ridiculous. Do you know how humiliating it is to explain to guests that the father of the groom is holding the event hostage? People are laughing already." I felt my hand tighten around the phone. "Humiliation?" I echoed softly. "Do you mean the rumors you spread? That I'm too poor to attend? That I'm an embarrassment?" Nolan broke in, his words hot, defensive. "You're exaggerating. Nobody cares about those little comments. This is bigger than you. You owe me this after Mom. After everything. You let her down, and now you're letting me down too." The accusation landed heavy, but I kept my breathing steady. "I sold my car for her treatments, Nolan. I worked overtime until my hands went numb. Don't rewrite history just because it's convenient." "Convenient?" His voice pitched high again. "You're jealous. That's all this is. Jealous that I built something bigger than you ever could." There it was, the word I had been waiting for. Jealous. He believed it. Truly believed his empire of deferred payments and glossy lies was something worth envy. "Success built on deception isn't success," I said. "It's scaffolding, and scaffolding collapses." For a moment the only sound was his ragged breathing, then Sloane again, venomous now. "You'll regret this, Gregory. Everyone will know you're petty and bitter. You're destroying your son's future out of spite." I let the silence stretch, long enough for the recorder to savor it. "No," I said finally. "I'm saving my dignity. If that destroys your fantasy, then maybe it wasn't much of a future to begin with." Nolan's voice dropped to a hiss, the sound of a cornered man. "If this wedding falls apart, Dad, it'll be your fault. Everyone will know." "Everyone already knows," I replied. "But soon they'll know the truth, and I'll have the proof in my hand." The line went dead with a violent click. I stared at the phone. The recording saved automatically to the cloud, its file name already stamped with the date and time. Evidence irrefutable. I leaned back in my chair, the tick of the pocket watch steady in the silence. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not bitter, not triumphant, just steady. The confrontation hadn't rattled me. It had confirmed everything I already knew. Nolan wasn't just arrogant, he was reckless, and now his own words were the rope tightening around his image. I opened the notebook and wrote in bold letters across the top of a fresh page. Call November 9th, 2024. Admissions. Ban, rumors, jealousy, threat. When I set the pen down, realized something. The collapse had already begun. The rest was just gravity. By Sunday morning, the whispers had spread so wide they no longer felt like whispers. They were conversations held openly at the diner, at the barber shop, in checkout lines where everyone thought I couldn't hear, or didn't care if I did. For the first time in years, my name was in people's mouths, not as a question mark, but as a period. Gregory Hale was right. Tom Ellis caught me before I'd even finished my paper. He leaned against my fence, coffee thermos in hand, wearing that mix of sympathy and curiosity, neighbors reserved for small-town scandals. "Greg," he said carefully, "word is the caterer packed up 3 days early. My sister's kid works there," said Nolan, cursed at the staff, threw his phone across the room. I raised my eyebrows, not feigning surprise. "And?" Tom hesitated, lowering his voice, even though no one else was around. "And people aren't blaming you anymore. They're saying Nolan and that fiancé of his wrote checks they never intended to cash. Folks at church were shaking their heads this morning, said you did the right thing by stepping back." I nodded, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in months. Truth travels slow, but it travels. Later that afternoon, I walked to the corner store for milk. The clerk, a young woman I'd known since she was in pigtails, leaned across the counter after ringing me up. "Mr. Hale, I heard what happened. People are saying Nolan treated the florist like garbage, refused to pay her after she already set half the arrangements. She cried in her truck before driving off. I just wanted you to know. People see through it now." Her words were simple, but they hit harder than she realized. For weeks, I'd carried the sting of humiliation like a stone in my pocket. To hear it turning back on them, it was like setting that stone down at last. By evening, Evan stopped by with another folder of photos. This time, it wasn't just vendors. He had shots of neighbors, acquaintances, even distant relatives, all gathered in little knots outside Briarcrest, arms folded, expressions sour. "They've started showing up just to watch the disaster," Evan said, sliding the pictures across the table. "Your son wanted an audience. Well, he's got one." One photo in particular froze me. It showed Nolan on the steps of the manor, shoulders hunched, phone pressed to his ear. Around him, half a dozen guests whispered, their faces caught between curiosity and judgment. He looked small, diminished, like a man who had built his castle on sand and was watching the tide roll in. Evan shook his head. "You don't even have to lift a finger anymore, Greg. They're doing the work for you. Every angry word, every unpaid bill, it's all fuel." I set the photos down and opened my notebook, writing carefully on a fresh page. Community consensus. Nolan's arrogance. Confirmed. Public perception shifting. That night, I sat on the porch, under a sky pale with stars, listening to the neighborhood hum with quiet life. Dogs barked, children laughed, a lawnmower droned in the distance. For once, none of it carried the sting of pity. People weren't looking at me as the man left out of his son's wedding. They were looking at Nolan as the man who had ruined his own. The humiliation had crossed the street, left my house, and moved into his. I leaned back, the old wood creaking beneath me, and felt a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not revenge yet, but justice, the slow kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself but shows up anyway. The neighbors were speaking, and the louder they spoke, the less I needed to. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky that couldn't make up its mind, gray clouds rolling low, sunlight fighting to break through, the air damp with the promise of rain. I sat at my kitchen table with the pocket watch beside me, its tick louder than the wind rattling the gutters. My name wasn't on the guest list, but that didn't mean I wasn't present. Evan was already stationed near Briarcrest, camera ready, lens sharper than any invitation. At 10 o'clock, a text came through. Florist never returned. No flowers inside. Guests whispering already. Minutes later, another. Shuttle bus late. Driver refused to start route without deposit. I imagined the confusion on guests' faces, their designer shoes sinking into wet gravel, while staff scrambled to explain. By noon, the rain arrived, thin at first, then heavy enough to streak the manor's tall windows. Evan's photos captured umbrellas blooming like desperate flowers, gowns clutched above puddles, tuxedo jackets used as makeshift shields. In one shot, a woman in pearls stood glaring at the sky, mascara running down her cheeks. Beneath it, Evan's caption read, "Dream day, huh?" Inside, the chaos only deepened. The DJ's booth sat empty, cords coiled on the floor like abandoned snakes. The caterer's staff, what remained of them, argued openly with Sloane's bridesmaids about menus that no longer existed. Someone had ordered pizzas to the back entrance, a detail that spread through the guest list faster than champagne ever could. But the image that caught me most was of Nolan himself. Evan's camera caught him mid-argument with Rowan the planner, his face flushed, hair damp with rain, his suit wrinkled before the ceremony even began. His finger jabbed the air, his mouth twisted into a snarl. The caption beneath simply read, "Vendors walking out. He's losing it." I set the photo down and closed my eyes. I could almost hear Elena's voice, calm and steady, reminding me that dignity doesn't come from noise but from restraint. I hadn't needed to storm the manor or shout in the streets. I had only needed to stand still while the truth revealed itself. At 3 o'clock, another ping, a video file. I pressed play and watched the storm peak. Guests in gowns and suits huddled inside the empty hall, their chatter echoing against bare walls. No music, no flowers, no food, just murmurs of disbelief. A woman's voice in the clip whispered, "I thought his father was paying. What happened?" Another answered, "Maybe his father was smarter than we thought." I played that part twice. Those words, "smarter than we thought," landed like a benediction. For weeks I had been painted as broke, bitter, irrelevant. Now, in front of the very people Nolan had tried to impress, the truth was rewriting itself. By evening, Briarcrest was a battlefield of damp clothes and dashed expectations. Guests slipped out early, shaking their heads, some muttering about refunds, others about reputations. Evan's final shot of the day was of Sloane standing at the top of the manor steps, her gown sodden at the hem, makeup smeared, eyes blazing not with joy but fury. Nolan stood beside her, shoulders hunched, face pale. Two monarchs with no kingdom left. I saved every image, every video, every recording into a single folder titled The Collapse. As night fell, I sat on the porch, the rain finally easing, the neighborhood quiet. The pocket watch ticked steady in my hand. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel invisible. I felt present, not in their hall of chandeliers and broken promises, but in the truth that no one could take from me. The storm had broken, and in its wreckage, Nolan and Sloane stood exposed, and this was only the beginning. The knocking started as a polite rhythm, 3 quick taps, a pause, 3 more, then turned urgent, the sound of people who believed doors were suggestions. Rain hissed against the porch, blown sideways by a wind that made the eaves complain. I was in the living room, the pocket watch open on the arm of the chair, its second hand moving with a confidence I borrowed. I slid my thumb across the phone screen, waking the recorder, and let the red light bloom. Through the peephole, I saw them, Nolan and Sloane, both soaked, hair flattened, expensive fabrics gone limp. His tie hung crooked, her gown peered out beneath a coat like a white flag that had fallen in the mud. The storm had found them, and for once, it hadn't asked permission. I opened the door just enough to keep the weather outside and the words in. "You're here late," I said. "Dad, please," Nolan blurted, pushing the door with his shoulder until I relented and stepped back. Water dripped from his cuffs onto the entry rug, dark circles spreading like accusations. Sloane hovered behind him, clutching her phone, eyes rimmed red and sharp. The house absorbed their presence the way a field swallows a thrown rock, without gratitude. I motioned toward the hallway, shoes off, Towels are in the closet. Sloane didn't move. We don't have time for house rules, she snapped, then tried to soften it with a smile that had performed better in brighter rooms. Gregory, everything fell apart. Vendors left. Guests were standing around like it was a joke. We need to salvage this. We need you to wire the balance tonight. I'm not your bank, I said. I'm your father. Or at least I tried to be. Nolan flinched. He was shivering in that way pride tries to hide. Look, he said, staring at the floor before lifting his eyes to mine. We made mistakes. Rowan said the hold you put on the account spooked people. Just lift it. I'll fix the rest. Please. The recorder hummed in my palm, a tame, patient witness. You banned me, I said evenly. Then you sent a bill. Then you told people I was too broke to attend. Now you want my signature to save your face. Sloane let out a tight laugh. Rumors, she said, waving a hand. People misunderstand. We had to keep the guest list manageable. These things are complicated. The comment about you being uncomfortable around our friends was taken out of context. Real guests only. Standards matter, I quoted, nodding toward her phone. That was the context. She pressed her lips together, a small tremor running through the performance. You can be in our lives without being at the wedding, she said. That was the compromise? Compromise, I repeated. That word begs for a dictionary when it's used like that. Nolan scrubbed a hand through his wet hair. Fine, he said, the word landing like a drop plate. Fine. You were right to be upset. But the vendors, Dad, I need you. We routed deposits through the company because it's cleaner for taxes. We always planned to pay everything. The final wire was supposed to solve it. And who authorized those representations to vendors? I asked. Whose name did you put behind it? His gaze flicked to Sloane, then back to me. It's my company, he said. Our company. My line, I said. My co-signature. My liability. The house settled around us, a beam somewhere in the ceiling, sighing as if it had a memory of better conversations. I gestured to the kitchen and they followed, leaving small, wet footprints that would dry darker than the floor. I offered them towels despite myself. Sloane took one with a murmured thanks. Nolan stared at his hands like they'd betrayed him. We didn't mean to humiliate you, Nolan said at last. Sloane thought. Don't, she cut in softly, warning and plea tangled. Gregory, please. We can fix the narrative. We can put out a post tonight. Unexpected logistical issues. Grateful to our community. Love conquers all. Whatever you want. Just send the wire. Here are my terms, I said, and their heads jerked up as if a bell had rung. Not for a wedding. For closure. 1. A written apology to every vendor you misled, copied to my attorney. 2. A public correction, no euphemisms, that you banned me and circulated lies about why. 3. Full access to Hale and Avery's books for the last 12 months. 4. You, Nolan, step back from financial authority until the audit concludes. If all of that happens, I will consider placing limited funds in escrow for vendor restitution. Not a celebration. A cleanup. Sloane stared like she'd heard a foreign language. You want us to confess? Publicly? Do you understand how reputation works? Intimately, I said. I've spent a month listening to you manage mine. Nolan's jaw tensed. Dad, that's not realistic. We'll be laughed out of town. You were laughed out of a ballroom today, I said, and the words didn't come out cruel. They came out tired. This is what the climb back looks like. I'm done lending you a false floor. Silence stretched, the rain ticking against the windows like a clock with bad news. Sloane's eyes narrowed. If you don't help, she said quietly, we'll tell everyone you refused out of spite, that you wanted the wedding ruined to punish Nolan, that you... She stopped when I placed the phone gently on the table, the red dot bright as a lighthouse. One-party consent, I said. Your words are yours. Keep going if you like. Her cheeks colored, the towel in her hands twisting tight. That's disgusting, she whispered. To record your own family. Family doesn't invoice you for love, I said. Nolan sank into a chair as if his legs had finally delivered their bill. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the steam rising from the kettle I'd forgotten to turn off. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words surprised us all, including him. "I was angry. After Mom, after watching you, failed to fix it," he swallowed. "I told myself I'd build a life so big it would never feel that helpless again. I didn't notice when it turned ugly." The apology didn't absolve him. It did something else, something more complicated. It made the room feel honest for the first time. I switched off the kettle and let the quiet hold us. "Then do the honest thing," I said. "Own it in the light. Sign the audit letter. Put the apology in writing. Step aside and let the numbers speak." He looked at Sloane. She looked at the future as if it were a shrinking door. "No," she said with the practiced certainty of someone who thinks the world is negotiable. "We can rebrand this. People forget. We just need money now." I picked up the pocket watch, felt its weight, the old metal warm from my palm. "People forget rumors," I said. "They remember records. I'm choosing records." Nolan stood abruptly, chair legs scraping. "You're choosing yourself," he snapped. But the fight had gone out of him and left something like grief. "I can't sign anything tonight." "Then there's nothing left to talk about tonight," I said. "You're not children. You brought papers to my door once already. Bring new ones if you want a different result." He took a step, then another, then stopped. "Do you still," he faltered, "do you still have the watch?" I held it up. The second hand said yes. His throat moved, but the words didn't arrive. Sloane tugged at his sleeve. "We're done here," she said, and turned for the door. Nolan followed, pausing on the threshold the way a boy might pause at the edge of a diving board, brave and afraid in the same breath. "I didn't mean to erase you," he said without turning. "I just—" He let the sentence break where it belonged. When the door closed and the rain swallowed their footsteps, I exhaled for the first time since the first knock. The hallway smelled of wet wool and a kind of relief that doesn't feel good yet. I wiped the entry rug with an old towel, then sat at the table and labeled 2 new files. House visit, admissions.m4a, and terms proposed.docx. I emailed both to Mira with a short note. "Greg, they came, admissions on tape, ban, rumor, company deposits. I proposed conditions in escrow. They refused. Your move." The reply arrived faster than I expected, as if she'd been sitting beside her keyboard, waiting for the universe to hand her a chance to work. "Mira, perfect. We file in the morning. Emergency petition for injunctive relief. Motion to appoint a special fiscal agent. Notice to creditors. Request for expedited hearing. Pack your watch. You'll want it for court." I closed the laptop and let the house return to its night noises. Outside, the storm was tiring itself out. Inside, there was a stillness that wasn't emptiness. It was staging. I wound the pocket watch 2 turns, not because it needed it, but because I did. Then I set it beside the front door where I wouldn't forget it, and went to bed with a line already writing itself across the inside of my skull. Tomorrow, I won't be a rumor in their story. I'll be a name in the record, and soon a judge would read it aloud. The courthouse was an old brick building that smelled of wax and rain, its halls lined with portraits of men who'd stared down their own storms. I walked in with Mira at my side, the pocket watch in my breast pocket, ticking like a private metronome. She carried a slim folder, not thick with paper, but heavy with precision. We weren't here to bury Nolan with emotion. We were here to bury him with facts. The clerk stamped our filing before the clock hit 9. Emergency petition for injunctive relief. Mira had the words polished to a blade. It requested 3 things: a freeze on Hale and Avery Media's accounts, appointment of a fiscal agent to oversee vendor claims, and a court date within the week. Attached were the recordings, Nolan admitting to the ban, Sloane dismissing the rumors, both confirming the misuse of the credit line. Not whispers now. Records. As we waited for the docket assignment, Mira leaned close. This won't just embarrass him, it will strip him. The judge won't care about feelings, only signatures. That's what I want, I said quietly. No more debates at dinner tables. Just the truth, written in ink. By noon, we were before Judge Anders, a man whose gray hair looked like it had been combed with a ruler. He scanned the papers, lips pursed, then glanced at me over the rims of his glasses. Mr. Hale, you co-signed this line? Yes, Your Honor. And you were excluded from the event these funds were meant to support? Yes, Your Honor. He nodded once, clipped. Then your petition has standing. I'm granting a temporary injunction. No disbursements, no withdrawals. Vendors may file claims through the fiscal agent. Hearing set for Friday at 9. He tapped his gavel once, not for drama, but for record. The sound echoed like a door slamming behind Nolan and Sloane's pretenses. Outside the courtroom, Mira allowed herself the smallest smile. Friday's your day, she said. They'll expect you to crawl back. Instead, you'll stand taller. I walked down the courthouse steps, the autumn wind sharper now, biting but clean. Across the street, Evan waited with his camera. He wasn't photographing me. He was photographing the papers in my hand, the seal still wet from the clerk's stamp. Proof. Evidence with edges. That night, the call started again. Nolan's number flashing over and over. I let them all go to voicemail. His voice cracked, furious, then desperate. You've destroyed everything. You think this makes you noble? Everyone will know you ruined your own son. But the town was already speaking, and they weren't saying ruined father. They were saying reckless son. The tide had shifted. I filed each voicemail under a new folder. Post-injunction rage. Evidence of a man drowning. Blaming the lifeguard who refused to dive in after him. By midnight, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the injunction papers spread before me, the pocket watch steady at my elbow. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was reclamation. My name had been dragged through gossip, erased from invitations, twisted into shame. Now it was inked into court records, stamped with authority, immune to rumor. I wrote a single line in my notebook before closing it for the night. Friday, the judge will read my name, and they will have no choice but to listen. Friday came dressed in gray, the kind of morning that smelled of damp leaves and inevitability. I arrived at the courthouse early, the pocket watch tucked in my coat, its weight steady against my chest. Mira walked beside me, her heels clicking with a rhythm that said she had no doubts about the outcome. Evan trailed behind, camera slung low, not to intrude, but to witness. He understood this was bigger than photographs. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Word had spread faster than rainwater in a cracked roof. Neighbors, distant relatives, even a few vendors filled the benches, their faces curious, some sympathetic, others hungry for spectacle. At the far table sat Nolan and Sloane, flanked by an attorney who looked too polished for the mess he'd been hired to defend. Nolan avoided my eyes. Sloane didn't. Her gaze was sharp, rehearsed, the kind meant to wound. It slid off me like rain on glass. Judge Anders entered, his robe neat, his expression that of a man who had no time for vanity. This is docket number 47, Hale versus Hale and Avery Media et al. Parties present? Mira stood smoothly. Gregory P. Hale, petitioner, represented by counsel. Nolan's lawyer rose. Respondents, Nolan Hale and Sloane Avery. The judge nodded, flipping through the file with efficient fingers. We are here to determine the disposition of Hale and Avery Media's credit line and the authority of its co-signers. The petitioner alleges unauthorized use of his name and seeks control to prevent further misuse. Mira stepped forward, her voice calm and crisp. Your Honor, Exhibit A is the original loan agreement. It names my client, Gregory Hale, as co-signer. Exhibit B is a recorded conversation in which the respondents admit to routing wedding deposits through this account. Exhibit C includes vendor cancellations citing non-payment. These are not rumors. These are records. She placed each exhibit on the bench with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. The judge studied them, expression unreadable. Then came the moment. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and spoke in that clipped voice of the law. Control of the Hale and Avery media line, by right of cosigner authority, rests with Gregory Hale. The petition for injunctive relief is granted in full. Vendors may seek restitution through funds placed under Mr. Hale's oversight. Respondents are barred from further financial representation until audit completion. So ordered. The gavel struck once. Clean. Final. My name, my full name, rang out in that room like a bell. For weeks it had been twisted in whispers, erased from invitations, smeared across rumor. Now it was spoken by a judge, entered into record, binding and undeniable. Gregory Hale. I felt the eyes in the room turn, the weight of their attention shifting. Some nodded, some whispered, some simply stared. For once I didn't shrink from it. I stood straighter, the pocket watch warm in my coat, ticking like it had been waiting for this moment as much as I had. Across the aisle, Nolan's face was pale, his mouth set in a line that couldn't decide between anger and shame. Sloane muttered to their lawyer, her cheeks flushed with something that looked uncomfortably close to defeat. Mira touched my arm, her smile small but certain. "It's done," she whispered. When the judge adjourned, I gathered the papers slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of my name linger in the air. As I turned toward the door, a neighbor I barely knew caught my eye and gave a quiet nod. Not pity, not gossip. Respect. Outside, the November sun had finally broken through the clouds, lighting the courthouse steps in pale gold. Evan snapped a single photo as I paused at the bottom. Nothing staged, nothing grand, just a man standing tall, his dignity intact, his name restored. For the first time in months, I breathed without weight. My story wasn't rumor anymore. It was record. And for Nolan and Sloane, that record would follow them longer than any rumor ever could. When the papers were signed and the court adjourned, the noise of Nolan's failure didn't fade. It echoed. Vendors found relief in restitution notices. Neighbors carried the story like fire through dry grass. And me, I carried nothing. For the first time in a long while, the weight had lifted. The house felt different when I stepped back inside that evening. Not hollow, not heavy, just quiet in a way that belonged to me again. The pantry door still held the taped invoice, the one that had started all this. I peeled it free, laid it flat on the counter, and struck a match. The flame licked the edges until the paper curled into ash. The total, $82,450, dissolving into smoke. It didn't smell like bitterness. It smelled like closure. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in the kitchen chair where so many nights of shame had turned into resolve, and set the pocket watch in front of me. Its ticking was steady, unhurried. I realized then that time hadn't been my enemy after all. It had been my ally, waiting for me to stop bowing to rumors and start standing in records. Tom Ellis stopped by the next day. He leaned against the fence, as he always did, but his voice carried something new. "Greg," he said, "folks are saying you showed real backbone." "That judge reading your name out loud? Well, nobody can twist that. They see you different now." I smiled, small but genuine. I didn't need them to see me different. I just needed to see myself again. Later that week, Mira dropped by with a folder of final documents. She placed it on my table, her smile weary but satisfied. "Vendors will be paid. Audit begins Monday. You hold the keys now." "I don't want the company," I admitted. "You don't have to want it," she said. "You just have to prove it wasn't theirs to abuse." When she left, Evan stayed behind. He snapped one last photo, me on the porch at dusk, pocket watch in hand, ash from the burned invoice scattered in a small tin by my feet. "For the record," he said, and I knew he meant more than just the camera. "Nolan hasn't called since the judgment. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Either way, it doesn't matter. For once, I don't need his acknowledgement. I don't need his gratitude. I don't even need his apology. What I needed was to remind myself that dignity isn't given. It's defended. And I had defended mine, not with shouting or fists, but with patience, evidence, and a steadiness my son never saw coming. That night, I wound the pocket watch, set it on the nightstand, and lay back in bed. The house was still. My name was clean. My dignity intact. And somewhere out there, Nolan would spend years trying to rebuild what he had lost in a single season. As for me, I was finished with rumors. My story was in the record now. That was my story of betrayal, patience, and finally, justice. If you've ever been underestimated or erased, remember, dignity is worth defending. Now I'd like to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of justice and revenge.